Okay, hello, and welcome to this eCampus News webinar, Protect Student and Faculty Data from Classroom to Cloud. My name is Kevin Hogan. I am the Content Director for eCampus News, and I am happy you are joining us today for what I know will be a very insightful and important conversation. This event is brought to you by Veeam. Veeam is the #1 global market leader in data resilience. They believe every business should be able to bounce forward after a disruption with the confidence and control of all their data whenever and wherever they need it. Veeam solutions are purpose-built for powering data resilience by providing data backup, data recovery, data portability, security, and intelligence. Headquartered in Seattle with offices in more than 30 countries, Veeam protects over 550,000 customers worldwide, including 68% of the Global 2000, and they trust them to keep their businesses running. Now, before we get to our conversation, I'd like to take a minute to go over some of the features of the platform that we're using here for this webinar. This event is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about missing anything. Within a few days, you'll receive an email message that contains a link to the recorded webinar, along with the PDF of the slides. If you have a question or comment for us, you can look down there at the bottom of your screen where there's a chat function. Feel free to use this feature also to contact someone from the eCampus News team if you have a technical question. So with those housekeeping items out of the way, let's get started with our conversation and some introductions. With me today is Adam Bouchard. Adam is a Veeam Data Cloud M365 Data Resiliency Specialist. Say that 5 times quickly, right, Adam? He's an industry professional focused on delivering the modern data experience by building relationships and solving problems together. With more than 17 years in the technology space and 5 of those years focused on the public sector market, Adam is a team player with a vast technical background that allows him to be versatile in solving complex solutions by providing significant insights from many points of view. And after a few conversations that Adam and I have already had, I know that he has plenty of insights for our readers and our listeners that he's going to be able to share with you, and really looking forward to the conversation. So thanks, Adam, for your time and for your anticipated ideas.
Thank you, Kevin. Great to be here. Look forward to this conversation and look forward to grow this out together.
Great. So now, before we get really into the weeds, maybe we'll ask our audience a question first, Chris, by throwing up just a quick poll question, seeing how many folks out there are already familiar with the Microsoft shared responsibility model. I'll suspect a good number are certainly comfortable talking about the little company that begins with M, but maybe not some of the particulars of the shared responsibility model. So we'll give our audience a little bit of time to answer that question. Adam, maybe can you give us the cocktail party definition of what that is?
Absolutely. So with the Microsoft shared responsibility model, really what we're looking at is Microsoft is going to provide you that platform to host your 365, things like Exchange, OneDrive. They're going to hand you that infrastructure, if you will. But Microsoft also notes that in their shared responsibility model, it's up to the end user, the client, the customer, however we want to say it, to really be responsible for that data that resides in their infrastructure. So certainly they're hosted, but it's not fully protected within the Microsoft environment.
Gotcha. And so while people answer that question, we'll see. All right. Well, look, I think we're in a good space here. You've already answered for a majority of our audience what that is, because really only 38% said yes, as 62% said no. So that really kind of gives us a good space of where to get started in this conversation, which is a hugely important one. I mean, even during the depths of the pandemic, when we were doing coverage for eCampus News, and while the whole world went into that remote learning beta test, including higher education, where students were sent home for up to 18 months, the attacks upon institutions of higher learning not only continued, but really kind of increased from what we could say. And even this week, I saw some recent reports that came out that the education sector is the most targeted industry when it comes to data attacks this year to date. with almost more than 3,000 attacks per organization per week, which is up about 30 or 40% from 2023, when we were still kind of in the depths of the pandemic. So maybe we can start, Adam, at that 40,000 foot. Give us your big picture of where the state of play is when it comes to data security in higher education.
Yes, it's those numbers are absolutely crazy when you look at it with the education space being that top vector for attacks, right? What we see out there as well, not to throw out so many numbers, but about 80% of those attacks are actually geared towards the M365 data. So again, with that shared responsibility model, there's a high vector of attack right now going after that 365 and that Entra ID in the education space, which is extremely something to make sure that you're prepared for, or God forbid, if something has happened, be prepared to restore back to normal operations.
Yeah, yeah. And so, I mean, are these kind of like recent changes, or is this something from your experience that's always been there, but it's just kind of like getting more sophisticated, or where are we on kind of on the spectrum?
Yeah, some of the key trends that we're certainly seeing, it's been really kind of building up over the last handful of years, right? Are really some of those targeted attacks, right? Really looking at the education, the higher education and K-12 institutions, really on some ransomware and phishing attacks, right? So those are some of the key trends that we're seeing continue to build and grow, with phishing actually being the number one vector, right? Think about that. Students, faculty, staff, seeing a very urgent email from a professor or from, an executive in the university, if you will, that those key target attacks are humongous. You kind of touched on that with COVID-19 coming around, with those exploitations of remote learning, right? So everybody having to stay with either within campus or be completely remote really opened the door to those cyber attacks and really showed the vulnerabilities that we have in the education market. And of course, if you look at some state-sponsored attacks, as you see there, really some of those higher education institutions being tied to larger attacks for, say, the state government or even beyond that. So those key trends we've certainly seen grow over the last handful of years, particularly since the pandemic of 2020.
Yeah, and before I ask my next question, let me encourage the audience again. If you have a question or a comment, type them down there in the chat function, and we can add that to our conversation here. It will really help Adam and I know where you want to go with this conversation, so get into that. But that's one of the interesting aspects when you talk about phishing, is one of the probably one of the primary ways in which hackers are trying to get in. And as sophisticated as the technology gets, and both on the offensive and the defensive, really a lot of that comes down to human behavior, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, we can start that with phishing, of course, right? From those, like I said, coming in as a student, faculty, staff, getting that important email. You have to click on this link in order to provide some details back, opening the door and opening those vectors of attack, from the bad guys, if you will. But when you really look at it, cybersecurity awareness into those student, faculty, staff is very, very important. But also, what about the God forbid catastrophic event that phishing attack turns into some ransomware or something large? And now, how do you get that data back, and how do you restore that data, particularly in that 365 environment, is something we're seeing as a huge attack vector still.
Yeah. And so what are the kind of the first steps with that? Because I mean, really, for our readers, our listeners who are here on this webinar, probably went into their industry, into their career on the techie side, right? More on developing code maybe than maybe being a psychologist, right? Or a guidance counselor when it came to setting up policies maybe for how faculty and students should or should not respond to, say, what is even identifying what a phishing attack is, as opposed to even to responding to it. So has that changed the role of leadership when it comes to the top tech folks at institutions?
I mean, I would have to think so, right? Because when you think about it, let's talk ransomware, for instance, right? I saw a statistic over the last handful of days that the average ransomware attack is anywhere from 567,000 to almost $4 million. Large range, but also both very large numbers, right? So when you look at that and you say to ourselves, how can we manage to decrease costs to our institutions? One of that is through education, but also having a solution in place that can help you restore, God forbid there was an attack, how you
Yeah.
can restore your business back to, day zero and have clean data moving forward is something that we're seeing as a path that most institutions, K-12 through higher ed, are looking at.
You also mentioned that last slide about the remote learning and that introducing new vulnerabilities to the network. Can you go into a little bit more in depth on what that means and how to protect against it?
Absolutely. So, if we kind of step back and look at the foundations a little bit of how to protect that, right? I'm going to talk about 5 different parts of a foundation. You touched about it earlier on, which was fantastic, but let's just dive a little bit more in if that's okay.
Yeah, let's go.
So you look at it as how I like to look at this is let's first look at the first one, which is data backup. Now, when I look at data backup, I think of it as more of business continuity, right? When you're looking at your 365 environment, how can you make sure your day-to-day operations are clean and your day-to-day operations can continue? If there was some type of phishing attack or ransomware attack or some kind of attack in your environment, you want to be able to have that business continuity model where you can restore it again back to day zero and be able to have a granular find for a particular email or document that you're looking for. So that's kind of step one is that data backup or business continuity. Foundation level number 2 is what I like to call data recovery, or even better terminology is disaster recovery, where we kind of touched on that of that, oh my goodness, catastrophic event. I need to have a complete restore of my entire environment as fast as I possibly can because there was some type of DDoS or ransomware attack, and I need to stop that and go back to when I had a clean version. So that's another foundation to look at for your data resiliency journey. The next part I like to call is data freedom or data portability, where it's always your data. So for our K-12 and our higher education institutions, we want to make sure that that data is always part of that institution. You never want to have that be held ransom or be held somewhere where you can't access your data. So 3 major points of the foundation. If it's okay, I'd like to go to number 4, which is data security. A lot of things like role-based access. How are you allowing folks to see certain emails? Who are you allowing to do restorations when you're looking at it from the operational standpoint in the back end? And of course, the last one, number 5, is data intelligence, right? Things along the lines of AI and ML, starting to utilize more and more of the technologies that are being built by companies like ourselves and our partnerships with Microsoft, and really trying to build those AI and ML capabilities into your restoration operation needs to just continue building that foundation straight forward. So that's kind of how we look at it from how you can really put a foundation together to be prepared.
Yeah. And it's pretty good. I think we got 15 minutes into the conversation without mentioning AI. But there it is, and it is in there. I definitely want to I hit that at a certain point. But a question popped up for me, before we get to that. I know, and especially when you're looking at Microsoft solutions and institutions that are using Microsoft as their baseline platform, there are a lot of standard security functions and features that are kind of baked into 365 and that they talk about. But what we're talking about here are some more sophisticated, advanced features and functions, right? Can you talk about what it means and why you want to go beyond just kind of what the basic security measures that might be baked into something that's more sophisticated?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it kind of really brings it back to that Microsoft shared responsibility model. So Microsoft does have some built-in adherent um, policies, if you will, or retention periods built into their licensing structure for their M365 environments. But those are pretty short, right? 15-day, 30-day windows. But what happens if that attack vector happened 45 days ago or a month ago? Or you need to restore back from a document that you lost 3 years prior, right? Having the capability to really have an unlimited storage or an unlimited amount of space to store your M365 data is something that is very important to have. So again, you can have those you can have those capabilities, if you will, to go back past the shortened time frames that Microsoft has in place. One thing that we can say, I know from the organization I'm at here with Veeam Data Cloud is, we've got over a 15-year relationship with Microsoft. So really building and collaborating and co-innovating together with Microsoft really allows us to get deep and granular when it comes to the M365 licensing, and of course, how to back that up and have restoration operations.
Yeah. In terms of the process, so say we have members on the webinar here who maybe had that basic functionality but haven't gone up to that next level. Can you talk a little bit about the process? Like, how long does it take? I mean, what is the vetting process between looking at maybe your solutions versus other groups that are out there? Maybe I'm sure you have to get some budgetary approval from the institution itself. Walk us through the kind of the timeline from soup to nuts when it comes to implementing a solution like yours.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I'm so happy you asked that. So, a lot does go into when you're making a decision on what solution to move forward to, particularly when you're looking to back up your M365 data. Because as you all know, your M365 data is sitting in the cloud today, right? Going to another cloud backup provider, there's a lot of steps that have to come through for our institutions here. And when we really look at that, we can really put together a 4-week kind of process and plan on how we can get to that fruition of making sure that our data is backed up and ready to go. And what I mean by that, you really got to start thinking about, because it would be a new kind of cloud application in an institution. There's certainly going to be some security questionnaires and some security conversations with the security team in IT. There's also certainly going to be some legal conversations with the legal teams and license agreements and things along those lines, right? Certain things that are very important to take care of. I'm sure there's some certifications and some certs that organizations need to have when it comes to cloud environments. So those times take a little bit of time internally for our prospects and our clients. But externally, I absolutely agree. Make sure you do some homework and look at who's out in the market and who are leaders in backing up M365. Because as we talked about earlier, about 80% of organizations that are hit, the attack vector is through M365. And an even scarier number of that we're seeing is less than 25% of those organizations are able to have a complete data restoration when that data is hit. So definitely need to do some vetting and homeworks. Of course, talk to folks like myself here at Veeam Data Cloud and my team, but please make sure you're out there doing some research and making sure you're understanding that Microsoft shared responsibility model. I saw that number there about 62 percent or so of users weren't aware of the Microsoft shared responsibility model. Something you have to understand, because God forbid, would hate for you to have some type of attack come into your organization and you're just not prepared for that restoration.
Sure, sure. Now, another question as I channel the audience, but again, audience, if you have a question, please pop them in there, because we would love to add them to the queue here. But I know from our readers and our listeners, we have ed tech execs who are at community colleges and in suburban New York, all the way up to major research and development institutions out in big schools. Are there distinctions between the defense strategies when it comes to the size and the scale of an institution? Maybe you can kind of break that down a little bit in terms of maybe number of students or faculty. Give us kind of an idea there.
So, a lot of folks always think that, oh, because it's a large university or a large state university, that's going to be the number one attack vector, right? But it's actually almost 50-50, where we can say that you're looking at it from, yes, those state attacks, state sponsored attacks, excuse me, are highly important. But if you're a smaller community college or a smaller K-12 institution, you're just as vulnerable as anybody else, because again, what can happen sometimes is, we know that regardless of the size and scope of the institution, some of the reasons are why education is attacked. Some of those are kind of under-resourced organizations, right?
Mm.
So if you're an attacker and you find a way to find some of those under-resourced institutions, I'm going to go and I'm going to really make sure to make a look at that from a cyber security staff and really look to see where we're at, right? And of course, any of those institutions, you talk about some research institutions that are rich in digital assets, right? And again, you can see here on some of the main reasons why education is that number one attack vector right now.
Yeah, especially that high public awareness and news coverage, right? I mean, that's an easy draw to get people upset because it's their kids, and they're probably paying a pretty price for their tuition, that they're taking away that data. Also, this idea that you have these ivy covered walls and you just have this assumption that your student's going to be safe behind it as well as the data, right?
You're absolutely correct. Some of the reasons of that attack you can see in there is that high public awareness, right? Some of the attackers, they may have a paid job, and it's awful to say, but to make sure they can get a particular university on that bad list, if you will, with news coverage. So these are things along the way that you have to really start to consider and think about, not only the cost of a ransomware attack to physically or get your data back. And like I said, less than 25% of organizations get all their data back.
Yeah.
But never mind the financial risk that it has when it comes to, students maybe joining that institution because of attacks that have happened from the bad news coverage. So lots of different vectors that you have to start to look at.
Well, now that we have our audience properly worried and nervous, let's talk about some solutions here. And really just, kind of like a step one, again, as I mentioned before, like maybe you have a basic security, right? And you walk in and you've been following certain protocols. What are your suggestions just in terms of tomorrow morning? You got off of this webinar and you're like, okay, well, I definitely feel like I need to get to some sort of next level. Besides calling you, like what are some of the things that our readers, our listeners can do to begin that process?
It's a great question. So we've worked with many higher education and K-12 institutions, and there's one that we just worked with over the last 3 months or so, right? And it came down to the conversation internally at the institution was what happens if, right? And it wasn't an attack at the moment. It was more of a what happens if. So you have to start to really think about future proofing, right? Because again, unfortunately, with those numbers of 80% of organizations are hit with an M365 attack, you have to think about not when. It's more a matter of if, and I don't like to say that, but that's becoming more and more reality.
Yeah.
So you have to really sit down and have those conversations internally with security, with M365 team, and with your C-level team, on understanding what if our institution was to get hit with a ransomware attack. How would that look from a news coverage? How would that look from a financial risk? And how would that look, just more importantly, day-to-day operations, to continue to educate our students and for our faculty and staff to have the necessary means to do so. This one large institution we were speaking with really came down to making sure that their day-to-day operations could continue to run smoothly, even if an attack was to happen, being able to restore back to a clean copy and being able to start business, classroom, even business in the background, right? Finance, marketing, everything that else that goes into the institution, being able to have that clean cut copy to move forward.
Yeah. Probably a good time to ask our second poll question, I think, Adam, as you were mentioning the 365. Chris, if you could throw that up so we can get a better idea from the audience. But do you have plans set up? I mean, are you prepared for the inevitable out there when it comes to this question? And it really is, it's not an if, but when, right? So we'll let you guys answer that as we kind of continue on. I guess I got to ask, with that, who else are you involving in this conversation of data security? Is it something that is just kind of kept to the techies themselves? Are you going around? Is it something that you're actually reaching out to faculty about before you go, say, up to the president's office, or is the president involved in the beginning? Talk a little bit about the dynamics because what you're talking about is establishing policy, right?
Absolutely. And that's a great way to place it, right? Is establishing that policy. So when you really look at it, of course, folks like myself and folks on my team, we'd love to sit with the president of the institution, right? Or the CTO or CIO of the institution, right? And sure, we get those opportunities as well throughout our travels. But absolutely, when you really start looking who and why is this important, finance departments are important to talk about because what if, right, happens? Those are important people to start having conversations with. Of course, when you're talking about IT, you have to start thinking about who in that stack should we be speaking with. Storage admins are big folks that we speak with. Security folks, right, because this could help save and stop some of those ransomware incidences. You know, really looking at it from a overall arching, from a director of IT networking, things along those lines. Those are all the folks that really start to get involved. But it's not just the IT group. Like I said, finance is important, and all the way up to the president of the school to really understand what's happening out there in the market, and particularly what's going on in the education market, being that number one attack vector. So preparation is hugely important.
Yeah. And we can see here that the results came in that less than half um, have a plan to mitigate risk with their 365 data. So that's a big flag right there. So number one, prepare for the inevitable.
Yes, that's again, we hate to have to say that, but again, it's not a matter of when, it's a matter of if. And do some homework, do some research. Call myself. I had to get in there, Kevin. But let's really start looking at how you can protect yourself moving forward. That's really the most important thing: protecting your environment, protecting your faculty, student, and staff, and all the data that sits in that 365 environment.
Yeah, and I know for some of our audience members too, when you're talking, you're at a university um, level, there's a lot of segmented systems as well, right? I mean, you can have some places that are research institutions that might have different systems out there altogether. Are we talking about a solution that encompasses all of those things, or do you take a kind of one sector at a time? Kind of talk about that dynamic.
Absolutely. So if it's all right, I'll put on my sales guy hat. Of course, the entire organization, right? That's how I would answer it. But in all reality, you're absolutely right. That's where that preparation and planning and conversations come in. When you start talking about with C-level, particularly presidents and C-levels in our institutions, or our director levels and our storage admins, and maybe that admin or that IT director is for the research, school of a particular university, right? Really understanding what would happen if that part of the organization was attacked. How much risk is there if the research facility, their 365 data was corrupted and a major attack happened? So, of course, you want to look at it as a full-blown picture, but when you're looking at it from data resiliency for 365, you can start as small as, a single user all the way through, some of the largest school districts, like we have one out across the pond with over 250,000 users utilizing solutions to protect their data. But it really comes down, I'm going to say it again, comes down to that preparation and planning and understanding what would happen if that part of our organization was compromised.
Yeah. Now that we kind of we started to 40,000 foot, and we're definitely getting down into the weeds here. So I'll ask you a weedy question, um, and get specific too about Veeam. What is the day-to-day interaction? I mean, is this something that kind of like sits in the back and that our users know is there, but they get a monthly report? Is it an active dashboard where you're monitoring things in real time? Give us kind of an idea of what the boots are on the ground for one of our ed tech execs who are on there, and how they expect to kind of like have an experience as they're securing their data.
No, that's a great question. And as we kind of get into the weeds there of like what that really means, right? At the end of the
Yeah.
day is how does this really work? So, when we look at it, there are a lot of different ways to kind of slice this up and really look at how you want to manage it, right? What I would like to talk about today is kind of how we look at it at Veeam, if that's okay, for Veeam Data Cloud. And I'd like to kind of put that in from like kind of how I like to say everything is included for Veeam Data Cloud. So what I mean by that, to answer your question, really comes down to two major things. We like to say everything is included. So in Veeam Data Cloud, all of your cloud infrastructure is included in the solution. That's your servers, your proxies, that's your updates, your patches, and all that good fun stuff when it comes to actually running the infrastructure to host the 365 environment. And what most institutions really love is that on the bottom left-hand side, there is the unlimited storage structure. So Veeam Data Cloud, we provide you with this cloud infrastructure with unlimited storage where your data can sit. So when you're kind of asking, how does it really sit? Is it behind the scenes? What's going on? What's happening is we're taking that data from 365, backing it up into Veeam Data Cloud in the infrastructure, providing all the infrastructure pieces for the institution. So now they don't have to worry about updates and patches or touching hardware. And of course, with that unlimited storage. But okay, great. What happens when that data does get backed up? Now what can we do with it? You said, does it sit there? Kind of what happens, what manages it? Here at Veeam Data Cloud, you can see on that user controlled side, or we like to call kind of our nerd knobs you get to turn. This is where each institution gets the opportunity to really guide their backup and data resiliency journey for M365 to exactly what their business needs are. How you customate and create jobs, how long do you want your retention policy to be? Very security-based, role-based access. Who has access to doing backups? Who has access to be doing recoveries, things along those lines. All the way down to, exporting logs to SIM environments and other syslog environments to continue to protect investments that the institutions has made in the past. So when you look at it from a little bit deeper into the weeds, it's a matter of getting that backup piece, making sure you have your backup jobs correct. We like to kind of break them up into each type of M365 application. So do one for just Exchange, do one for just SharePoint, one for OneDrive, and one for Teams, right? And really give you that granular ability to do restoration operations if needed. If that that attack did happen, how can I pull out that one SharePoint document that I need for my class to prepare for my class and teach my class today? And you can go all the way back into the business side of it all. So you love to be able to say that it's a set it and forget it because that means there was no issues, right? But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you have your data backed up, your M365 data. Remember that Microsoft shared responsibility model. You need to have that data backed up and then choose the right solution on how you want to be able to control your data when it is backed up.
Yeah, and listening to you talk about the solution and how you work with it, I mean, one of the other hard realities here is this is not a one and done sort of situation, right? Can you talk about this is just a continuing process that you have to think about every day, and you're watching change every day.
Absolutely. When you look at it, it becomes more of a like your electric bill, unfortunately, right? It's something you need to have, right? It becomes more of an operational kind of cost, an operational type of need for institutions. Because sure, you can back it up for 6 months and then not back it up again. But again, what happens if?
Yeah.
And the unfortunate thing that we're seeing over the last 5+ years are more and more attacks are happening, particular in this space in the education market, and they're just going to continue to grow and grow. So you're absolutely right. It's unfortunately not a one time and done. It becomes more of that operational cost that we're seeing a lot of institutions go to, and just having it as part of their operational development.
Yeah. And I promise we get back to it. So let's dig into it a little bit. How is AI affecting data security? I mean, for better and for worse.
We're starting to see a lot more AI and ML machine learning really starting to come around in the backup space. It's still pretty new in infancy, if you will, out there in the backup and data resiliency market. But you really want to start to look at what type of applications you're looking to back up. For this particular instance, we're talking M365. But if you look at other applications, you want to really start to look at that application, that manufacturer, what they're doing in the AI ML space, and really start to define with your vendors that you're going to choose for your backup providers, making sure that they have really close relationships and really close collaborative and co-innovative ties with that institution, with that larger company. The reason I say that is because when AI and ML really start to come in play, and I'll talk Microsoft a little bit, when Copilot really starts to become digested into 365, you want to make sure that you have an organization like Veeam that co-innovates together with Microsoft to build those into the products together. It's a very important piece to understand those relationships between your application providers and your data resiliency providers, just to make sure that there is that nice relationship to make sure you're not only getting the best of breed and the best approach, but also the most trusted as well.
Yeah, and when it comes to AI and AI in education, most of the attention gets focused on the classroom, right? And classroom instruction. And again, for good or bad, I mean, there was the original fear cycle of AI is going to take everyone's jobs and every kid's
Right.
going to cheat. And then it's like, all right, what? Nah, not so much. Now there was more of a hype cycle, and now I see what we're kind of sliding into is more of a reality cycle where it's here's another technology tool that can enable instructors to do their job better and for students to what they do better. And now on our side, on the boring side, the gut side, those same tools are being embedded as well, right? I mean, that's where the focus should be on the tools making our jobs of data security and ed tech execs less having to worry about minutia and more focus maybe on the big picture.
I would completely agree with that, right? You think back when AI and ML started coming into the classroom and just into day-to-day life, right? Exactly, those fears were taking away jobs, or students are going to now just learn from AI and ML and chats and all of that stuff. But in reality, it's kind of making the environments much more interactive,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's making the environments just change and how we might have to look at it from an education standpoint. But now that it's coming into the business side of the house, the behind the scenes, in the guts, if you will, like you said, you need to really start to think about how you can leverage those best of breed technologies to the best of your abilities in the most secure and fashion for, again, for that, God forbid, not when, if an attack was to happen.
Yeah. I mean, here at eCampus, we use Microsoft as our platform, and I've noticed it already in terms from a security aspect. An email will come in, and the co-pilot's kind of already like, "Are you before you even read it?" It's like we're not so sure about this one, right? Before you even get into it, like let me think about it twice before you click on that. So I mean, so that's an example of where the AI really can be a help and not a hindrance.
Yeah, I agree. And like we said, that's just in the infancy stages, right? So it's just starting to get into that business undergrounds of everything that we do today. And it's going to continue to grow and grow. But you're 100% right. Starting to see those aspects on your own email, right? From, do you really want to click on this? Do you really want to open this? Think about that on a large scale in the entire institution, somewhere in the background, having the ability to manage, know, see, kind of before scenarios that can
Yeah.
happen. Those are the things that we're starting to see become more and more prevalent when it comes to data resiliency on the backside when you partner with the likes of like Microsoft or Copilot and things along those lines.
Yeah. And again, to go back a little bit to kind of the remote setup and the remote networks. Can you talk a little bit more about device management? I mean, are we talking about? I mean, and students today, one of the things, especially in the higher ed space, right, that went to that immediate remote learning
Mhm.
experiment, which I think for the most part, I mean, on the higher ed really did a good job in terms of being able to be flexible and to go to that. I've also noticed that unlike on the K-12 side, things have gone back to normal, whatever normal is, but like kind of going back to things pre-COVID where the students who went through those 3 or 4 years and were accustomed to using their phone to check things that they had never been able to check before, they're not going back again, right? So, I mean, what talk about how you see the defense industry coming to work with those new realities.
It's absolutely when you look at it from a best of breed perspective. Okay, so a lot of our higher ed institutions, like I said, are you can still remote learn. You can still learn from home. Come into class when you can, remote learn, or you're ill, whatever have you. But when you really look at it, what's kind of really morphing and happening, right? You start talking about devices, and I'll lean a little bit on the M365 side of this. At the end of the day, that's all cloud-based already, right? So when you start looking about these new AI and ML and Copilot and all the types of cloud technologies that are out there, sure, we have the hardened device because we need the laptop to type and to provide our work.
Yeah.
But when you really start to get under the underpinning and start really looking at where does that data go? Where does that data sit? Right? And so you start to really think about, okay, if it's M365, I have that device. That device could be in the classroom, could be at home, could be at Starbucks, could be wherever that student might be at the time to do that work. So of course, there's some attack vectors that happen to try to get into that device itself. But when you start thinking about where does that application land, does that application land in the cloud, something like M365? It's a matter of having the proper best of breed technologies together to work in work together to make sure that you have a nice backup provider. I'm sorry, a nice uh, scan device, scanned application on your device. Scan that data when it comes from the device to the cloud, and of course, when it's in the cloud, what happens then? So again, I would really start thinking about the broad picture. Is really that best of breed technologies to make sure that you're selecting the proper laptop. Again, that comes to education to the students, and they're going to purchase whatever they're going to purchase anyway. But just making sure that you utilize the proper applications so you can really start to build out a data resiliency plan all the way across the board, regardless of where that student sits.
And then so that goes back to policy a little bit too, right? So now another responsibility you see um, for our audience here is being involved in acceptable use policies, right? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean that's hugely important, and again, that's one of the key factors when folks like myself and folks in my team, when we do get to have those conversations with some, president of school or C levels or VP levels in institutions, is really understanding what that policy is, right? And really understanding, what changes can be made, how often can these changes be made, most importantly, why should they be made or why are they not being made? So when you really sit back and look at what policy do we have in place for the entire institution, you need to start looking at it, if you aren't already, from an internal, right? Your internal networks, your internal applications, your internal data. You need to look at your cloud applications, your cloud data, and everything that's sitting in the cloud. Then you have to really start to think about what types of policies do we want to have in place where, does every student need to VPN in, for instance, in order to provide a document to their professor? Or are we going to utilize M365 as our exchange model to exchange those documents? That's where, we come to that best of breed from a technology standpoint. But when you're looking back, how and why we create those policies, it all circles down to that planning conversation again of what are we looking to do today? What are we looking to do tomorrow? And what are we looking to do in 5 years? Because you know what? What's happening in 5 years is going to be a lot different than what's happening today.
Yeah, yeah. And I know, pardon me, having these conversations, educators always love to share best practices, right? Well, this is what I did, except when it comes to data security, because no one wants to talk about. But
Yeah.
once they don't want to open up the kimono. But maybe you can give our audience a little bit without naming names. You can keep it intentionally vague, but give us some examples of some of the situations that you've seen over the years of situations of institutions of higher learning being in some tough straits and tough scrapes, and how you guys help get them out of it.
Yeah. So one comes back. It was an institution actually a little bit east of where I reside here. There was an incident, a full blown incident that happened the week before finals.
Nice.
And this is when you could still, this institution, you could be remote or you could come on site. And it was about 50% of students came in, 50 didn't. But at the end of the day, did it really matter? What actually mattered was there was this catastrophic incident where there was zero access to their network the week before finals. So if you can really sit back and think about what happened over the next 2 weeks, well, nobody could really get the files and documentations that they were studying from, right? And we couldn't have finals because the network was compromised. They did not have a policy or a plan in place of a what if scenario. So if you think about things we talked about, this was major newsbound. It was out there. It's a very well-known institution. And this was not good press that the institution wanted. More importantly, it inhibited the students to continue their education and continue what they were trying to finish. So we went in and had some conversations about, this did happen. It's awful that this did happen. We talked about kind of those less than 25% of organizations get all their data back. Well, this institution happened to pay some sort of a ransom, and they also got about 10% of their data back. So the real scary part was, okay, this happened. This cannot happen again. So we were able to come in and have conversations and talk about those policies and plan those policies on this. You are here now. So unfortunately, what happened over the last 2 weeks has happened. But how do we now start from scratch here? And how can we make sure that if anything was to happen again, you could have a great data resiliency plan in place, where if you did have a great data resiliency plan in place prior to 2 weeks ago, we could have just reverted back to the last cleanest copy 2 weeks prior, started business as usual there from both that business continuity and that disaster recovery play, and been able to go through the rest of the semester, finish the semester, and gone through finals. So it's real. It does happen. And it's scary when it happens. And it's a spot that nobody wants to be in, both from folks like myself and folks at institutions. And again, more importantly, those faculty, students, and staff that have been working so hard to get to where they wanted to get, to graduate, to get out, to finish off their education journey.
Yeah, it kind of reinforces our earlier conversation about it. The best defenses, it might not just come with the technology, but it comes with all of the best business practices that whatever partner you're involved with is going to be able to advise you on policy and advise you on. My takeaway so far has been it's like the Boy Scouts, right? Be prepared and have those contingencies in place.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing that I wanted folks to take out of this conversation is, sure, I'd love you to come play with Veeam and the Veeam Data Cloud for your data resiliency plan. But the biggest thing I want everybody to understand is you don't want to have the opportunity to resolve something before it happens. Right? So put the plan together, start having those internal conversations, right? I think you said it was about half of the participants here today didn't have a risk mitigation plan in place for
Less than half. Yeah.
M365. So I would highly advise start to internalize those conversations, because you don't want to be like that one institution that you just didn't get to that planning phase or that implementation phase yet, and you think that it's something that's not going to happen. The last thing I would hate to see is that it did happen to somebody on this line or somebody watching this from afar. Please plan, please prepare, and of course, do your due diligence and make sure you put your institution in a spot for that, God forbid, if an attack happens.
Yeah. And it does, from my conversations, it falls upon our group to develop those things. It's not going to come from the finance department or
Yeah,
some other place, right? I mean, it's just by default, it kind of comes into IT.
it absolutely does. But I would certainly, like we talked earlier, I would certainly raise those conversations into finance, because, of course, like anything else, there will be a cost to data resiliency, right? There will be. But when you look back, you have to start looking at it and say, is that investment that we're going to make to be prepared, God forbid, that catastrophic event did happen? Or do we kind of take that chance and then look at the financial risk that it puts us in, right? So those are conversations to have with finance folks, but you're 100% right. It certainly starts here within IT to start having those conversations, really understanding that Microsoft shared responsibility model and really having a plan in place to mitigate that risk.
And I'll only hope that in 2025 at this point, do you find clients or potential clients having an issue with that in terms of making the argument for it? Or have we all kind of gotten to a point that even maybe somebody who's not tech savvy or out of that could say, well, yeah, it's pretty important to keep this stuff secure?
It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. So, from that first poll question, where I believe it was, how many folks know about the Microsoft shared responsibility model, right? And I believe it was in that sub quarter, sub 25% range, or right around that 25% range that we had understanding of it. Please go do some research, Google Microsoft shared responsibility model, and understand what that really falls into. Why I'm going back to that is, even at 2025, you know, Microsoft recently released in the last year that said you should do more than just what we have in here from this shared responsibility model. You should look at third-party vendors to back up your M365 and other applications in Microsoft, because and they do a fantastic job with it. They will protect their infrastructure and make sure you have the infrastructure to utilize those applications. But that data is your data. You control it and you need to protect it. So when you really start having these conversations internally, I would say the poll numbers come into what we're seeing out in the field day to day, right here, all across the country that with folks that are on my team that I play with, is not everybody is understanding of the shared responsibility model. And then when they see that, they go, oh my goodness, what happens then if? And then, of course, when you look at it from a risk mitigation standpoint, again, those numbers fall kind of right in line is, well, if we didn't really know about Microsoft shared responsibility model, we thought we were covered because we're using the Microsoft licensing. What next? What do we do now? So it's about in that 50-50 range. It's really about educating our educators. I love saying that, sorry. It's really about educating um, our institutions on where they stand today. And again, like I said, where they want to get accomplished today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, and just continue to be ready. Because unfortunately, the attacks are going to continue to come. And the scary part, like we talked about at the very beginning, is how education is the number one attacked vector.
Yeah. So you talk about 5 years in the future. I'll put you on the spot here as we start to get to the top of the hour, but maybe over the course of the 5 years, what are you seeing as the top concerns from schools about what's next when it comes to data security, or what are some of the fears you might have yourself as a company, and what you're starting to gird yourselves for?
First of all, foremost is again, as we talk about why is education number one,
Yeah,
right? And we kind of touch those points and you'll see that in there. So that's one thing I'd want us to all sit back again and think about is why is the education market the number one attack vector, right? We talked about maybe low amount of resources. We talked about remote learning. We talked about, that cost structure. We talked about, oh, look we've got this large university. We attacked them. We got them in the news. Like, no, that was fun. But what I would really start to look at, and you touched on a little bit, and we kind of joked around a little bit again, is really that AI and ML and what's coming in the industry. It starts just like pretty much anything else. It starts kind of, at the user level, and then started in the student level, and it started in some of the classroom level. All of that is starting to get built into the business side of the house, like you said, behind the scenes in the guts. So when you're looking at it from a 5 year out perspective, you want to really start to make sure that you're covering all of the attack vector spaces that you can. The problem with that is the attackers are very good, smart, and they're always evolving, always changing. So you have to really make sure, and I'm going to go back to that best of breed technologies, making sure that you have the best of breed in place, whether that's a SIM, whether that's your firewalls, your wireless networking, your data resiliency platform for your entire environment, or your 365. Really look at it to make sure that you have great relationships between all those organizations together, and really start to look at what does the next 5 years look from us from a student population standpoint. What are our business plans? And make sure you're kind of tying in your IT security, strategic security plan into the business plans of the institution. That's hugely important. And if those conversations aren't being had, I highly recommend starting to really bring in the IT security into those high level. What are we trying to get accomplished over the next 5 years?
yeah. So I knew the toughest part of this conversation would be to end it, but as we do kind of come to the wrap up, that was some really good summary insights that you just went out. But what for our audience would you want to communicate as the number one takeaway when it comes to, and specifically with Microsoft 365? We'll assume they're all using that as a platform. What is that one takeaway that they can do right now to get to some degrees more secure than they were when they got up this morning and went to work?
But I would lean very heavily on educate yourself on the Microsoft shared responsibility model. There's some great literature that Microsoft provides for that. I would highly lean upon get ready and plan to prepare, right? Start to plan on how you get there. You need to be prepared, but you can't go with a preparation until you plan for it, right? So again, have those conversations of what we're looking to do and have those conversations of the what if scenario would happen if our institution was happened to get an attack and we did not have a data resiliency platform for that M365 environment. And most importantly, continue to strive forward. It's been a great conversation here. Continue to strive forward and providing great institutions for our students to continue to learn. And of course, opening up for more conversations with your student population on what they're seeing as well. We're starting to see a very big trend in understanding what our student population is finding, because they're in the weeds way more than we are from IT folks. They're out there in the wild and are seeing stuff and hearing stuff and are capable to do stuff. And you'd be surprised what some of our students can see and have capabilities for. But plan, prepare, and understand the shared responsibility model from Microsoft. And of course, reach out to folks like myself, folks on my team. Of course, we'd love if you go that way, but reach out to professionals in the space to help you and guide you through that planning.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And we'll say that for the next webinar about students and white hats and black hats. They could we could have a whole hour just on protecting your data systems from your own students, right?
Absolutely, good. Got some stories that we could tell on that. That's for sure.
I'm sure. I'm sure. We'll save it for next time. But I see that our time is just about up here, so I'm gonna wrap up the conversation. I'd really like to thank Adam for this really informative presentation and Q&A. And I'd like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. As a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. So thanks again for participating and have a great day. Adam, thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody.